Joseph E. from Hanyang University. I'm wearing my Hanyang t-shirt, if you can see. Very proud to be a Hanyang teacher here. Today is May 18th for our guests from the Western Hemisphere. Is anybody from the United States or Western Hemisphere? Okay, all right. So we recognize, so for those from the Western Hemisphere, it's May 18th. We recognize all those struggling for freedom and against tyranny, including the 1980 protesters from my birthplace. Now I'm gonna share my presentation with you on, I put it on Google Doc. So here, I put in the chat mode, and then I'm also going to, share my screen with you, okay? But everything's also in Google Docs, so you don't have to write down notes. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, so everybody can see my screen, right? All right, right. Okay, let me make this bigger. Okay, all right. So today we're here to discuss the global trend to limit political speech that either harms national security or the dignity of victimized groups. South Korea is a rare example where one can be imprisoned for talking to or about spies, foreign spies. So we're gonna start with a Jee Man-won case. So this year on January, the South Korean judicial system sentenced Jee Man-won to 2 years in prison for his alleged false claim that North Korean special forces had participated in the May 18th Gwangju uprising in 1980. And then so the May 18 law specifically targeted far-right activists, so-called far-right activists such as Jee Man-won, saying we need a South Korean version of the Holocaust law to punish those who deny what happened in the past. Okay, now his conviction raises two questions for scholars of free speech. The first question is the absence of North Korean forces on May 18 an established fact? And second, if the event is historically established, should the government punish false statements? Okay, now the current debate here in South Korea is frozen between, you have the mainstream, progressive mainstream, that never challenged established facts, that never challenged the narrative that there were 0 North Korean forces in 5/18, and a small circle of right-leaning North Korean de facto activists, YouTubers, and non-mainstream academics that claim potentially hundreds of North Korean agents. So you have this polarized debate. Now, what is missing from this debate is neutral objective scholarship, which theorizes and investigates logically plausible claims with non-trivial possibility. And so the theory of hundreds of North Korean special forces lack strong evidence and logic. Because historically, how could you have hundreds of North Korean special forces go undetected? Historically, the largest North Korean contingent to infiltrate was 31 KPA commandos in 1968. 31, that was the largest. Okay. On the other hand, one or more North Korean agents directly or indirectly communicating with progressive organizations, but perhaps making little impact, sounds more plausible and consistent with the history of context between North Korea and progressive organizations, according to, as documented by Andrei Lankov. And so even recently, the police have cracked down on the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions for allegedly meeting agents of North Korea in Hanoi and Phnom Penh. And so we do have a documented history of context between North Korea and progressive organizations. That's number one. But also number two, right-wing governments and National Intelligence Service have politicized this issue and sometimes fabricated evidence. Okay. And so what is disputed is actual context between North Korea and progressive organizations in Gwangju. But again, instead of investigating this issue and expanding the factual consensus, the mainstream seems more focused on labeling, stigmatizing any critic of the established narrative as far-right denialists and supporting informal and formal suppression. And so in 2021, 518 Group sued and got a Udok University professor fired. They pressured all Korean companies to drop their sponsorship of the 2021 Disney show Snowdrop because of its fictional portrayal of a North Korean spy during the 1980s democracy movement. And mainstream academics, they support laws to criminalize any discourse of North Korean agents in South Korean democracy movements. Okay. As a result, many conservatives claim that they're victims of religious-like suppression, this from a left-wing majority. In a way, a left-wing, so this is like a left-wing communist conspiracy to silence the conservatives. So the current state is we have a cultural war with mainstream hegemony, right-wing conspiracy theories. And you have this conflation between what is harmful with what is empirically false. Okay. But I think that, I think scholars like Max Baver would argue that most historical events are not really clear, but include many shades of gray and uncertainty, especially anything related to foreign espionage. And number two, what is harmful may not be false, that the empirical presence of a few North Korean agents does not invalidate the moral contributions of democratic protesters. Certain statements can be considered deeply offensive, but still be empirically valid. Max Baver argues that scholars should be value neutral in our empirical research and not moralize facts. Okay, so do not, so just because maybe like one or two North Korean agents, maybe they communicated with democratic protesters, does not mean that this was morally a bad thing. Okay, we should just find out what happened. We should focus on the facts and then let politicians do what they will. Okay. For me, an example of this more open, rational debate is the March 26, 2010 sinking of the South Korean naval ship Cheonan. So the official investigation concluded that most likely Cheonan ship was destroyed by a North Korean submarine. On the other hand, you have many academics, journalists, and citizens who said maybe North Korea did not attack. Maybe it was another, maybe it can do a different cause, such as a US mine. Okay. And so there was no March 26 law to imprison these dissenters. We do have a criminal defamation law, and Lee Jung-hee was sued. Now, I think we have some Korea experts here. Does anybody know what happened to the criminal defamation suit against Lee Jung-hee? If anybody knows, please yell the answer. Okay. Park Jin-hyeon, do you know what happened to the loss? Lee Jung-hee, did she go to prison or not prison? Okay. So no prison, no money, right? Okay. And so one of my students confirmed that Lee Jung-hee was sued, but no prison for her. Okay. And I don't think she got a fine either. And so we can see, so at least for this debate, this March 26 event is more open, rational debate. Okay. And therefore, the majority consensus on 326 submarine attack is more organic, less force than 518. And so, okay. All right. Now, let me go to my second case, which is Lee Seok-ki and the national security law. This case is a bit more complicated. It's about talking to North Korean agents. Okay. And so again, what are the shared facts? The shared fact is that you had a secret May 2013 meeting where Lee Seok-ki called on his colleagues to prepare for war. Okay. Number two, there is no evidence that Lee or other members executed any of these plans. Number 3, the UPP chairwoman said that this was all a joke. And number 4, that the revolutionary organization members did visit North Korea individually and in a group. They did contact an unidentified person who may have been a spy. But again, there is no direct evidence that he was a spy. So we only have circumstantial evidence that, that Lee either directly or indirectly talked to North Korean spies. Okay, circumstantial. And so this is the facts, shared facts. What is disputed is, what was the real intent of Lee and his revolutionary organization supporters? Was this a specific conspiracy? Or was it basically wishful thinking and boasting with his friends? Number 1. And number 2, did revolutionary organization members, Lee's supporters, did they really communicate with North Korean intelligence agents? Okay, we just don't know as scholars. Okay, all right. Now, and we're not gonna know until North Korea opens up its files. But for now, we can ask some general questions, which is that, were Jee or Lee have been convicted under a US-style legal system, Brandenburg versus Ohio, which states that governments cannot punish inflammatory speech unless it is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action. So unless it's connected to imminent lawless action, government should not punish political speech. Okay. And my second question is, do their statements equally pose a significant and immediate danger? And then I received an email from Lawrence Peck, who's an advisor to NK human rights organizations. And he said that, well, Jee Man-won did not advocate or plan any violence, but Lee Seok-ki is different. He involved specific plans for practical acts of sabotage, which were not impossible to implement and which were planned to coincide with North Korean acts of aggression. Lee also had links to a hostile foreign power. That's Lawrence Peck. On the other hand, Professor E in 2014 said that the government did not produce evidence of actual links or conspiracy between Lee and the DPRK government. Okay, all right. And number 2 is that, should free speech advocates, members of Heterodox Academy, champion the freedom of both Jee and Lee and criticize the laws or case laws that led to their convictions? Okay. And so again, Lawrence and Professor E, we disagree. Okay. Professor E, so Lawrence says that we need security laws for a nation under constant threat, which is South Korea. Professor E says, as a democracy, as a liberal democracy, we should reform laws that are invoked to limit public and even private discourse on political issues. That suppression, censorship leads to this vicious cycle. In 2014, 2015, I actually predicted that, conservatives, we should not punish Lee Seok-ki, we should not imprison him, because this is going to lead to a cycle of revenge. And I think this is what's happening. So we imprisoned Lee Seok-ki, the government disbanded the UPP, the progressive, strong progressive party. And then it was a strong progressives who pushed to imprison, to suppress strong conservative discourse, such as a 518 law. And so again, it's this cycle of suppression. And so what we have in South Korea is that instead of progressives defending the rights of Lee Seok-ki, they focus on suppressing and imprisoning conservatives. And conservatives, such as President Yoon, instead of trying to fight for the rights of, Jee Man-won to say what he wants, he focuses again on those. He investigates, the progressives for allegedly talking with North Korean spies. And so instead of focusing on free speech rights, instead they're more focused on censoring their opponents, investigating their opponents. And so again, it's a vicious cycle that I'm hoping that liberals can try to intervene. Okay, so the bottom line is that South Korea remains a rare country where one can be imprisoned for talking to or about alleged North Korean spies. Okay, now before we move on to general discussion, I wanted to introduce one of my colleagues, Mr. Park, who's going to talk about the 3 strains of conservative thought on Gwangju. Can you come up? And then we'll have a short discussion and move to Francis, and then we'll move to Francis' presentation. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing now. Okay, so once again, if you everything that I wrote is on the Google Doc. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay, Mr. Park, go ahead. Oh, so Mr. Park is he's actually a supporter of Jee Man-won, okay? And so at least for his freedom of speech. Okay. So and he's a scholar on the South Korean right wing. So tell us about the 3 strains.
Hello, I am a graduate school student from Hanyang University. My short presentation will be about Gwangju democratization movement. Yesterday was May 18th when Gwangju democratization movement happened. South Korea President Yoon Suk-yeol participated commemorative ceremony in Gwangju, and he spent time with Gwangju citizens. Today, I'd like to introduce some South Korea conservative right-wing opinions about Gwangju democratization movement. First, most of conservative right-wing supporters in South Korea used to commemorate Gwangju democratization movement. Usually, they express big apology to victims. For example, previous conservative right-wing party leader Kim Jong-in, who was an economic major professor, kneeled down at Gwangju and had time with victims' family. According to my experience, most of young conservative right-wings used to recognize or commemorate Gwangju democratization movement. Second, previous congressmen from conservative right-wing party gave very critical approach about Gwangju democratization movement. Congressman Kim Jin-tae, who was prosecutor, Congressman Lee Jong-myung, who was in Korea Army, Congressman Kim Sun-rae, who was pharmacist, they addressed critically at the Gwangju democratization movement seminar in South Korea National Assembly. Kim Jin-tae said, "We should find out the real truth about Gwangju democratization movement." Lee Jong-myung said it was revolt, and Kim Sun-rae gave critical approach to Gwangju victims. Third, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jee Man-won. He was originally from Korea Army, and he was a Vietnam War veteran. Actually, his major is not political science or history. He got PhD degree as system engineering in United States. He's almost 80, but he's in the jail. The reason is that he expressed very unique opinion about Gwangju democratization movement. He paid attention to protesters' action because they tried to attack police office, jail, and weapon storage while protesting. Thus, he argued that North Korea regime did a big role at Gwangju democratization movement. It means North Korea leader Kim Il-sung sent special spies at Gwangju while protesting. According to my experience, many old or strong conservative right-wing activists used to agree Dr. Jee's opinion. That is all of my short presentation. Right-wing opinions about Gwangju democratization movement. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Park. Okay. Mhm. Okay, thank you. I hope nobody puts him in prison. Thank you. Okay. All right. Okay, now let's open it up for a quick Q&A before we go to Francis' presentation. Would anybody like to have a question or comment about anything discussed? And please go ahead and turn on your video if you can, so we can make this more interactive. Right. And I see a couple of legal experts, Professor Marie and also Professor Mark Ramsier, maybe some other legal experts as well. How would you address my question? Do you think, for example, like Lee Seok-ki, in the US legal system with Brandenburg, would Lee Seok-ki still have gone to prison? Marie, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, maybe Mark, do you have a comment on this? Well, my own opinion is, well, no, I don't think it is likely. Now, the US does not have a criminal defamation, or, I mean, especially the defamation of the dead person law. I mean, those things do not exist here. So I don't think either of these, Jee or Lee Seok-ki case, would have resulted in the conviction.
Okay, great. So at least legally, they would not have been convicted. But Marie, from a from a political perspective, do you think that the imprisonment of Lee Seok-ki or Jee Man-won was justified? Or do you think that, go ahead.
No, I'm not really familiar with Lee Seok-ki's case, but that I looked at the Jee Man-won's case, and it's kind of interesting that he's been in this legal trouble for a long time, for many years. He has been prosecuted many times, and in the past, he was acquitted, but then this time he was convicted. So if you look at the other court opinions on how it changed over the years, it poses some interesting question, I think. But then even when he was acquitted, I think that was about 10 years ago, the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and basically the same fact and the same situation, and how the court just changed its opinion during that time period. So it poses a very interesting and a significant the question. Basically, there is no consistency in the court interpretation or the logic in interpreting the same law. Of course, the Gwangju law didn't exist 10 years ago, but as far as the defamation, the charges were concerned, unfortunately, there's not much logical consistency there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Marie. Was there any other quick question or comment? If not, let's go ahead. Francis, let's move on to your presentation, please.
All right. Sure. I'll just pull that up. All right. Can you all see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, this is not the right slide. There we go. All right. Thanks everyone for coming, and to Joseph and Mr. Park for starting us off. I'm going to walk us back a little bit and just talk about the logic and the purposes of memory laws and how well they actually fulfill the functions that they're supposed to. So my presentation is on what is the best way to honor victims of past tragedies. So we're just going to cover the following topics. So firstly, establishing that there are two ways of honoring victims. One has been through the censorship of harmful, in quote unquote, ideas versus rationally debating opposing accounts in public. Then we'll move on to the components to honoring victims, evaluating the effectiveness of memory laws, specifically the May 18 or Special Act, in fulfilling these functions. And we'll do this by paralleling the Special Act to Holocaust denialism laws, which, as Joseph's presentation mentioned, was specifically referenced as a model for South Korea to follow. And then we'll just conclude with how well memory laws can fulfill those functions. So starting with 2 ways to honor victims. So there are 2 ways to honor victims. The first approach is one that Joseph earlier described as a rational million approach. So here facts are judged in a court of public opinion, and opposing accounts and arguments are aired and debated in public until a consensus about the truth emerges. Currently, however, censorious approaches such as cancellation and shadow banning, and in some cases, legal prosecution, have been popular throughout the world. In America, we have seen the widespread attempt to rewrite history and educational curriculums in the wake of George Floyd's death and consequent upspring in Black Lives Matter activity. In South Korea, we have demands to imprison people like Jee Man-won for stating North Korean forces' involvement in the Gwangju incident, thus forwarding account of the Gwangju incident as a riot among some conservative academics who are opposed to this sort of censorship. So I'm going to argue that a memory law may seem like a quick solution to preserve the dignity of those who suffered and the nation's global reputation. However, this quick fix solution may generate more problems because it prevents the public process of comparing opposing arguments to refine our understanding of the truth. To understand why censorious approaches can cause more social problems in the name of preventing harm, let's turn to 2 historical reconciliation attempts. So the first one on the right side is Shinzo Abe, and we're going to talk about his apology before Australian Parliament for Australian suffering at the hands of Japanese troops in World War II. And then Chun Woo-won's recent apology to families of Gwangju activists. Okay, so contrasting the 2 reconciliation attempts born from a rational million approach versus a history of censorship. So you may have seen some news from April that Chun Woo-won, the former dictator's grandson of the authoritarian military regime who oppressed the Gwangju activists, Chun Woo-won visited Gwangju Cemetery and issued a formal apology to those who had lost family members during the Gwangju uprising. Some saw this as a step to reconciliation, and others a publicity stunt. But what still stands is that the sorting of facts about Gwangju's history is a messy, multi-step process complicated by morally ambiguous activism within the incident. The context that Chun Woo-won made his apology was one that already enforced an artificial consensus about the Gwangju uprising. That is, that the soldiers were bad and the activists were good. His apology enhanced polarization, reiterated a dominant position in spite of remaining uncertainties about the facts, and further reduced the acceptability of asking any questions that may paint activists in an unflattering light. Chun Woo-won's apology likely adds to the indignity of censorship experienced by those who questioned the mainstream narrative, further dividing and accumulating resentment. In contrast, Shinzo Abe's apology to Australian Parliament for Australian suffering at the hands of Japanese troops arises from a different context. So Joseph Yee's fantastic article on remembering Shinzo Abe's positive vision of liberal nationalism discusses how Abe should be recognized for his recognition of Japan's faults. So Abe accepted and operated within a pluralistic democratic system in which his policies were vigorously disputed by politicians, media, and academics. During Abe's leadership, Japanese courts and colleges neither criminally indicted scholars for dissenting views nor terminated their employment, as was seen in both China and South Korea on various cultural issues. When Abe issued his apology, The Guardian described it as a moment that froze time. In contrast to Chun Woo-won, Abe was seen as a legitimate figure who represented the nationalist Japanese wing and had come to make his apology after vociferous debate about history. Those who doubted the legitimacy or extent of Abe's apology at least accepted that it marked an important milestone in reconciliation. Beyond this event, and according to Abe's request, Australians no longer demand condolences from future generations in Japan for historical wrongdoings, since these had all the arguments about this wrongdoing had been aired out already. Despite these examples, many still see memory laws as a quick way to ensure victims swiftly receive the honor and dignity they deserve. To examine how true this idea is, I'm now going to consider the components to honoring victims and then evaluate how well memory laws actually fulfill those functions. So the components to honoring victims can generally be categorized through three mechanisms. One is punishing offenders. Two is creating national consensus about an event that acknowledges the victim's suffering, and allocating reparations and accolades to the event's heroes. So the main question is, how well do memory laws actually achieve these aims? And focusing on the Special Act, then the Special Act is relatively recent, so it's actually difficult to tell what the impacts are and will be. However, as Joseph mentioned, it has been described as a South Korean adaptation of Holocaust denialism laws whose history and outcomes have long played out in Europe. So first, just to make a little note about a comparison of the May 18 Special Act to Holocaust denialism laws. There are obvious differences between the Holocaust and the Gwangju uprising. No serious historian can deny the reality or seriousness of the Holocaust as an attempted global extermination of Jews. In contrast, the Gwangju uprising is a regional event that's still ridden with uncertain details and morally ambiguous forms of activism. However, the May 18 Special Act and Holocaust denialism laws are comparable in their usage of state coercion to enforce a narrative. If memory laws cannot fulfill their functions of reconciling with the uncontroversial evils of the Holocaust, there is little chance that they will achieve their intended purposes for memorializing the Gwangju narrative. So, to start with the punishment of offenders. So in the case of the Holocaust, the perpetrators were fairly clear and underwent the Nuremberg trials. So these perpetrators included former cabinet ministers, economic planners, and propagandists of the Nazi Party. However, the punishment of offenders in the Gwangju case is more complicated. First, many victims remain unidentified, and the dictator, Chun Do-hwan, died without revealing the person who ordered troops to fire at protesters. Initially, the Gwangju Special Act required the nullification of awards and military decorations if they were rendered solely for involvement in the suppression of the Gwangju democratization movement, which was definitely a move towards punishing offenders. But then a special prosecution system to enforce this act meant that it couldn't be introduced. Furthermore, as Joseph also mentioned in his presentation, the debate is polarized between an exceptionally small circle of North Korean defector-turned human rights activists and a mainstream non-partisan or progressive camp in South Korea. South Korean non-partisans don't seem to challenge established facts surrounding the historical event at all. So that's on the punishment of offenders. Next, moving to the second function, which is creating a national consensus. So memory laws the track record of memory laws in cementing acceptable narratives about a nation's history are quite grim. So we can see this in the failure of German denialism laws to highlight the Holocaust as a historical atrocity. So Germany has among the strictest prohibitions against Holocaust denialism and Nazi promotion. And just to highlight how strict they are, in September 2006, a German store owner named Jürgen Kamm went to trial for displaying Nazi symbols, even though they were part of a campaign against Nazism. So the swastikas had crosses going through them. However, the judge fined Kamm 3,600 euros, as German law forbids the use of Nazi symbols regardless of context. Despite the strictness of Germany's anti-Nazi laws, the country has experienced a resurgence of far-right ideology, that organizes through internet platforms and skinhead culture. One psychological explanation I might propose for the resurgence of neo-Nazis despite stringent memory laws is the reactance principle. So the reactance principle is the idea that people perceive prohibitive labels or instructions as threats to their autonomy. So they engage in such prohibited behavior in order to restore their sense of freedom. And this was actually a phenomenon that was originally observed in smoking cessation research. So the reactance principle may also explain why the imprisonment of atrocity deniers may cast them as free speech martyrs within communities that are skeptical of state-backed versions of history. This is especially true for the Gwangju uprising and subsequent democratization efforts that are still ridden with suspicious deaths and, for example, activist use of gun violence against the police during such events. So using the state to enforce a cultural narrative is a very perilous endeavor, even for the unquestionably immoral event of the Holocaust. Trying to impose an artificial consensus about the narrative of the Gwangju case will likely backfire, as resentment builds among those skeptical of the democratization story. Indeed, promoters of the riot narrative and other types of denialists have succeeded in propagating their narratives through innovative uses of technology and media targeted at young people. So that is on creating a national consensus, which is not promising for memory laws. So the next factor is compensating victims. So as I mentioned at the beginning, sorting facts about Gwangju's history is a messy and multi-step process, which is mired in a lot of complications by some of the questionable actions that activists took. Trying to think of how we can compensate victims is further complicated by the fact that taboos about the event prevent anyone, especially students and youths, introducing any kind of viewpoints, any other viewpoints that are deviant from the mainstream one, that is. So an example of an alternative viewpoint is Tara Oh in her article, May 18 Groups Suppress Freedom of Speech. In it, she notes Professor Park Hoon-tak's lecture, during which he mentions Gwangju activists had seized armored vehicles, robbed more than 40 armories, and killed people with semi-automatic rifles. The May 18 Commemoration Foundation condemned Professor Park for giving an anti-democratic lecture, denigrating and distorting the 518 democratic movement. Even further on from the Gwangju case in a different incident, on May 1989, 46 Dongui University students detained 5 police officers and killed 7 after throwing Molotov cocktails. The Review Committee for Restoring the Honor of Democratization Movement Involvers and Providing Compensation undertook a very controversial decision to deem the students democratization movement involvers. The perceived legitimization of lethal violence against the police in the wake of Gwangju activism risks undermining the heroic status of those truly fighting for democracy during the uprising. So just to conclude, despite being a regional event, the Gwangju uprising has gained international significance for its message about people's capacity to spontaneously organize against dictatorial regimes. However, we need to rethink the censorious approach used to honor the dignity of its victims. As Joseph mentioned, memory laws shut down any possibility for debate and deviate from South Korean scholarship's tradition of free speech. More than that, however, memory laws seem to be ineffective at properly punishing offenders, establishing a genuine consensus about a historical event, and are more likely to generate backlash from skeptics of the mainstream narrative. Therefore, the imposition of memory laws to punish undesirable viewpoints appears to be an ineffective method for forming national consensus and solidarity about historical events. So the alternative way to honoring history. So I've argued in this presentation that simply canceling views by using the powers of the state to quell public doubts about a historical incident is a recipe for building resentment and the proliferation of unsubstantiated theories. Those determined to valorize activists become paranoid about and unable to address the counterarguments and potential misinformation generated by those who disagree with characterizations of the uprising as a heroic climax. Only through innovative as well as traditional educational modes and open dialogue can we honestly address riot narratives and uncover the legacy of the Gwangju uprising. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening. And I'll stop sharing screen now.
Okay, let's give a round of applause to Francis' presentation. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Francis. Now, once again, please, if able, keep your video on, audio off, so we can all see each other's faces and we know that you're not okay. So, that way we know none of us are spies or whatnot. Okay. Okay, I see a hand. Sean, did you have a hand? Turn your audio on, please.
Sorry, that was me clapping. I do have a question, but maybe I'll wait for others to ask first.
Sean, go ahead. You have the floor.
Oh, okay then. I have more of a comment than a question, actually. And it concerns whether legislation such as criminal defamation law or the national security law incentivizes a certain kind of denunciation, which is the accusation that particular activists or individuals or groups are controlled or directed by external agents. So in the case of conservatives, it's to accuse left-wing organizations such as most recently the Confederation of Korean Trade Unions of being directed by North Korean agents and of providing for the elaborate information or evidence to this effect. On the left-wing side, this is based on conversations I've had with some young left-wing Korean students. The accusation is that the Korean right, and particularly Korean right who are committed to reviewing dominant perspectives on the colonial era, that the Korean right is in the pay or in the control of Nippon Kaigi, the kind of mostly retirement-aged far right, or I guess conservative stroke lost cause advocacy organization, which is quite prominent in the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan. So I think in both cases, these arguments involve a kind of accusation of treason, which can be weaponized under national security law or under criminal defamation law, where the conservative activists and writers are accused of betraying certain key assumptions about the colonial era under Japanese control. And perhaps there are perhaps two things to remark about this. One is that these kinds of accusations need to be investigated closely, but they also reveal a certain assumption about a lack of agency amongst the Koreans who are accused of being controlled by these external forces, that they're not themselves motivated politically to believe the things they believe or to do the things they want to do. They do actually require being controlled by or directed by these external agents, which creates, I think, a kind of prima facie implausibility about such accusations. And secondly, I think if there was a concerted move to repeal or to revise national security law, the National Security Act and the criminal defamation law in their current forms, a lot of the sting will be taken out of these kinds of denunciations. That's kind of my comment.
Okay, thank you, Sean. So Sean's comment was that without criminal defamation laws, maybe this political culture of accusation may be a little bit less. Okay, so I think that's an interesting comment. Thank you. I see a couple of new faces to our forum. I see Brian Betts and from NK News and Larissa Giacono and some others. Do you guys want to say hi? And maybe, Larissa, do you want to say hi? Maybe briefly introduce yourself?
So hi, my name's Larissa. I'm currently studying at the University of Western Australia. I'm studying law and economics, and I was notified by Francis about this presentation. I'm really glad that I came along and learned something new.
Okay, thank you. Larissa, do you have any question or comment on today's presentation? For example, like what makes a good apology?
Well, this is all very new information. I didn't really know anything about this before watching, so it was good to kind of have an introduction as well. And it's definitely inspired me to maybe go do some more reading as well and have a look at some of the documents that you forwarded in the email. But yeah, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed listening today.
Okay, Brian can talk. Brian, if you have an email, if you have a comment or question, you're welcome to put it in the chat mode. Okay, now I wanted to kind of open it up. We just have a few minutes left. Just any question or comments about, about the things mentioned today. All right. I do think that it's a real concern as a professor here in Korea that, when I'm either teaching about history or researching history, I have to be very cautious about mentioning North Korean involvement in the democracy movements. That people might get angry and they might, and also not only social censure and possible job termination, but also government criminal prosecution. So I think these are all things that kind of weigh on teachers in South Korea. And so I think to be safe, they just never mention North Korea. It's almost like North Korea does not exist in South Korean history. Okay. Francis, did you have a hand? Go ahead.
Yeah, I did. Sort of an answer to what Sean was just saying when Sean was talking about how these accusations of treason and assuming that people on the opposing side must be motivated by connection to an external organization. It kind of reminds me of in Australia, then anytime somebody speaks out against these ultra green movements, and it's because, oh, you obviously have connections to the mining companies, Rio Tinto, blah, blah, blah. And I've kind of wondered why there's been this assumption of, oh, you must be funded by some dodgy organization. And I wonder if it's just because the alternative to that is that the opposing viewpoint might actually have a point. Do you think that's the main reason it's threatening?
Oh, okay. Yeah, this kind of ad hominem attacks, but I also think it's a rise of kind of a conspiracy theory on both the left wing and right wing. That that instead of people are not making a good faith arguments, that there's actually kind of this conspiracy among, say, mining companies, to push their agenda, right? And so I think we have a lot of this kind of a conspiracy thinking among both left and right. And that's something that, I think hopefully members of, people who believe in open rational debate can kind of push back on. So let's focus on the argument. Let's focus on the evidence as opposed to who they might be associated with. Okay. All right. So thank you for that. Yes. And then was there some other, okay. Okay. And does anyone else have a point? Mark or Chizuko or any of my students? Comment too? Question? People have a lot more questions for the comfort women debate, but that's not it. That's not due for a couple of weeks. Okay. So Meredith, do you have you want to have a final question or comment? You seem to be listening carefully.
No, it's all very interesting. I don't feel like I have an organized question, but I was very interested to hear about the apology from Chun Doo-hwan's grandson being so polarizing. And because I haven't been really following the debate about that very closely. And I was interested to hear more about why you think that might be.
Sure. We actually have Mr. Park, who's right wing. Okay, I mean a conservative, and when Chun Doo-hwan's grandson apologized, how did conservatives think? Were they, did the apology move them, or do they think they just more oppression, more suppression? Sure. Can you come up? Okay. So Mr. Park is going to answer Meredith's question. How did conservatives react to the grandson's apology? Okay.
actually including left wing and right wing in South Korea. They very welcomed apology, but in my personal opinion, John Don's grandson is having drug, and he went to the police office a few times, and I think he is not that normal individual. So yeah, and also apology. Yeah, apology is fine, but I want to tell you about his personal problem.
Sure. So I think what Park's saying is that, like, this apology, the grandson doesn't really represent us. He doesn't really represent, he's not a credible representative for conservatives. So the grandson is very different from Shinzo Abe. Shinzo Abe is a credible elected representative, a credible elected, representative of conservatives in Japan. And so when he apologized to the Australians, for the, that was, like Francis said, that was like a moment frozen in time, right? And so I think that, again, like we have to, theoretically, we have to ask ourselves, when do apologies work? When are they considered legitimate? And so I think for apologies to make real impact, I think one, South Korea needs more open, rational debate. So neither faction feels like they're being suppressed. When the grandson apologized, conservatives felt that this was just another case of, of the progressives making conservatives look bad. Okay, so it just led to more polarization. So I think, again, we need like open, rational debate. And then we need somebody who is a more credible figure among conservatives, who can kind of come to a consensus on what happened in Gwangju, and then sincerely apologize for the many wrong things that happened, right? And hopefully we can get maybe like mutual apologies, maybe from conservatives for what the Chun Doo-hwan government did, but also maybe from the progressives for the violence that they committed. And so I think this kind of more mutual understanding, mutual apologies can lead to, more sincere reconciliation process. Okay. And maybe Mr. Park can write an essay like that, but I don't know but Mr. Park's worried that writing an essay on that note, even an essay like that about reconciliation may get him in trouble, right? Either formally or informally. Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Park. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Was there another okay, anybody else? Okay. Mark, you don't have any question or comment, or you want to save it for 2 weeks from now? Okay. Oh, I see Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, no, I'm here. And it's been fascinating. I just got to a place that had a video camera. That's why I wasn't watching before. But yes, no, I think what people have been saying sounds exactly right. That when you have these sanctions, the game becomes how do you identify yourself as a victim? And then use the law to protect yourself. And Germany even Germany, I gather, has some problems with its Holocaust denial law. And if it's going to be that for the Holocaust, then it seems to me most anything is bound to be a failure. So everything that people have been saying sounds exactly right.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I also see Helen Poon, who's been a long-time participant. Helen, do you want to say hi? You can say hi and introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. So I am a complete outsider. Actually, I am living in Japan, but I feel interested in Korean politics, and I'm Chinese myself, and I have been attending, and I learned quite a lot.
Do you have any question or comment about anything? What was the most interesting thing that you learned, like either today or for the past few weeks?
Well, what has been the most thought-provoking is open debate. Actually, I have been following Korean news almost every day, and I may say sometimes I may say my mind is shaped by the news. Yeah, because, okay, they always say the former president is bad, Moon Jae-in, and every day the Democratic Party and also People Power Party, every day they are fighting. This is what I learned from Korean politics, partisan politics. And yes, they are attacking each other, but sometimes there is no reason because they just want to gain votes. So I think what I learned here is open debate, be rational. This is really the most important.
Right, thank you. Again, I don't think it's necessarily bad that politicians fight, but I do think it's important that scholars, we try to avoid a fight, okay? So again, like the first casualty of war is truth, as according to the ancient Greeks. And so I do think that it's important for scholars and professors and teachers to be, to be a neutral bystander, okay? And so we can hopefully create these shared facts. Okay, great. All right. Now let me see now. Okay, so any other comments or questions? Okay, then it's almost, it's almost 11, the hour time is almost finished. So I'd like to thank everybody here for participating. And then 2 weeks from now, we'll do another sensitive issue, the comfort women debate. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I'd like to give everybody a round of applause. Thanks for coming. Okay, and I hope to see many of you guys in 2 weeks. Okay, great. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Mark, Meredith, Sean, for all your questions and comments. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you. Happy May 18th day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Joseph. Bye.
Bye-bye.